The show that goes there. This is the Shaggy Jenkins Show on the Pacifica Radio Network.
It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show on the Pacifica Radio Network. Welcome to it. Boy, do we have a lot to cover today, including the eating habits of lesbians. We'll talk a little bit about how the FCC has not been doing its job. Yeah, and of course we'll try to avoid all of the debacle of the State of the Union address as we get into some of our other stories of the day. Before we get to any of that, I'd like to welcome you to my show. Hi, my name's Shaggy Jenkins. I'm a critical thinker, a problem solver, a guy just left of normal insane and always found centered in common sense, and on my website at shaggyjenkins.com. This guy can be found at FYINation.com, host of his own show called Some Say. He is our far northeast correspondent, the guy that's braving the polar vortex. Please welcome Thomas Reynolds.
Yes, and by braving, it feels like Las Vegas weather, and Las Vegas weather is having Connecticut weather, I'm told. So, weird.
Yeah, it's a weird weather week where all of a sudden here in Hawaii, winter went away, came back for one day, and now it's summer again.
That is weird, yep.
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw this out there because this was not covered in the State of the Union address. Climate change is real, y'all.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, God. Well, let's begin with one of our stories that you brought to me, and I'm going to let you set this one up because when you sent the story to me, of course, it was from our friends at Free Beacon. When you sent the story to me at first, I had to kind of go, oh, God, this guy is reading The Onion as our news source now, but no, there's a little seriousness to this headline. Thomas, if you would.
Yes, the National Institutes of Health is spending over $200,000 to figure out why obese lesbians binge eat. This isn't Netflix and chill or anything like that. This is actually a thing. Researchers note that the implications of being a black lesbian woman on binge eating have never been studied before, so now apparently they're going to. Young adult lesbian women are twice as likely to be overweight and obese as their heterosexual peers, and black women are similarly more likely to be obese than white women, according to the grant. Despite the well-documented disparities in binge eating, little is known about contributing factors in the lesbian women, and in particular racial minorities. So this grant is going to find out the disparities and why and how, and our friends over at Free Beacon are freaking out about it. They just can't handle it.
Okay, because I'm just going to bring up a little something here that's weird. I kind of see the validity of this research. Do you?
Yeah, no, totally. I do as well. And this is one of those things you need to find out the cause to figure out what the root of the cause to solve the problem. And this is what they're doing with the research. And they're acting like this ginormous sum is going to the researchers. But it's in the grand scheme of the federal budget, this is pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, I mean, come on, if they're trying to explain away how the border wall was a line item kind of deal, it's only $5 billion. It seems weird because here's the thing, Thomas, in the past you have brought us stories about $20-something thousand spent to talk about meditation and obesity, and now here we have almost $250,000 invested to find out why lesbians binge eat. Can I throw out just a theory here? I like the study, but I think science is on the wrong path. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm not quite sure. Tell me why, Shaggy.
Okay, see, this is the deal, because in the United States, we have a very big stigma against talking about and studying mental health. But the thing is when it comes to certain marginalized communities that suffer bullying, suffer social ostracization, just name it, they are in a marginalized crowd. These people suffer the consequences of things like the symptoms of mental health. Obesity, poor health, lack of social engagement, what have you. So I know that this was kind of a funny headline that you sent me, because the headline that you sent literally says, Feds spend $228,636 to find out why obese lesbians binge eat. And I'm going, wow, that's a headline. But the thing is that, Thomas, science is once again, I think, being sneaky and saying, let's look into a marginalized community and their symptom, obesity, instead of looking at the root causes, which is depression that's probably brought on by societal stress.
Well, I think you're close, but I think hopefully with the study from the National Institute of Health is that they'll find those reasons involved in the study, because that's what the research is meant to do, right? They're trying to figure out the root cause on why lesbians and women of color who are lesbians binge eat. So this might be a helpful way to talk about what you're trying to get at and get a conversation going and not make it... Because let's be honest, this headline is all about clickbait, right? You want to, it's an outrage alert type of thing. You got to be outraged that almost $250,000 is being spent when we could fund the wall or whatever else silly little thing that Donald Trump wants to throw at us. But this is a small amount in the grand scheme of things that might do a large amount of work, no pun intended.
Yeah, because when we're talking about large impacts, when we study things that are symptomatic, like obesity being a symptom of some sort of other thing, we usually go down the rabbit hole and find some interesting conclusions. And it's funny to me, but it seems like because the United States, which is, let's just be honest, we're comfortable with a couple of extra pounds around our waist. I mean, compared to the rest of the world, we have a cool body image. We don't care. But the thing is that even with that being the circumstances of the quote-unquote American life of excess that leads to a big middle tire that wears around your midsection, even with that being the case, a lot of times people that are suffering through depression and do not go the route of drugs engage in other compulsory behaviors, including binge eating. So when you're looking at a community like, let's say, people of color who happen to be gay, you're talking about two different systems of oppressions that rule their lives. And when we deal with them and the conditions that their lives are in, eventually, even if we start at obesity, Thomas, eventually we're going to have to circle around to inclusion, societal norms, and mental health. But
yes, absolutely. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, because the thing is that your point, and I'm gonna let you kind of respond to this, because your point that this is pennies on the dollar was not accurate. It's actually fractions of pennies on the dollar. Remember, NASA's entire operational budget is 10% of 1 penny of every tax that you pay to the federal government. So with this thing being so small, we're talking about slivers, a millionth of a penny that the American taxpayer has had to pay for this, once again, study that will eventually take us back to exploring societal norms, acceptance, inclusion, and mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I want to point out, just in case, so we don't miss it, and why I almost interrupted you, was because we are seeing an attack on science in this. Because not only are they, and it's a veiled attack on science, because they're attacking the research and they're attacking people who are willing to go and get a grant to do research. which will study the effects and what the problems are of obesity and things of that nature. And we need to remember that these are the same people who deny climate change, as you talked about, and everything else, which we won't hear in the State of the Union and anything of that sort. And that is a demonstrative effect of this. And what they do is a larger scale attack in veiledness. And it drives me quite crazy when they're able to get away with it with a clickbait headline.
Yeah, because I mean, I could make the obvious joke here that the reason that some lesbians are overweight is because they keep dating the skinny girl that won't finish her food and says, "Here, you eat it. Here, you eat it." You got to stop dating those skinny Becky's girls, okay? Find you somebody that can hold her own plate down. But the thing is that this study, if you look into one of the quotes that came out about it, this sounds not like a waste of money. I want to read you this quote that basically sums up what this story or what this study is supposed to be about. Quote, "Consistent with minority stress theories, preliminary data suggest sexual minority stress, or the stress people from stigmatized groups are exposed to due to their marginalized social status, likely influence binge eating." Now, when you hear a quote like that, I feel like I just got a PhD.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, it goes back to the attacking of science, the attacking of research, and the attacking of logic and reason. And this is what they're doing with this article. And to make matters worse, they're turning it into a clickbait headline, which only, makes it worse because you get these, dimwits on the right who see lesbian and then they're about ready to have a heart attack just from that because, we all know how they think.
The problem is this is the ultimate kind of example of why we have a problem, at least on the right, of getting some sort of inclusion. Because let's not forget, Republicans, specifically people like Murkowski out of Alaska and what's her name, Collins, they've been talking about the lack of diversity and the lack of gay people within the Republican Party movement, especially at the higher legislative branches, calling it a white boys club. So when you have stories like this, it seems that this is endemic of someone trying to keep in power, at least on that side of the political scale, the white boys old man club. So, Thomas, if you're a minority, and specifically in this case, if you're a minority that suffers two different societal stresses, how do you find a voice or even any sign of support with the Republicans?
You don't. It's that simple because they would much rather mock it and not deal with it than actually look into the effects of, oh my God, something like binge eating and something that is ends up being harmful to your health in the long run. And if for only a fraction of the time that they took to write this article in an incendiary way, took it seriously, this might be an eye-opener for Republicans and liberals alike.
Yeah, because, see, here's one of the things that Republicans are kind of missing with this story, and it goes beyond just being a person of color, of being a person that is gay, of being a lesbian. This goes beyond all of that and just is a human, quote, human condition. Healthcare in this country is hard as hell to get and maintain, no matter who you are. So when you go to these marginalized communities, and specifically economically marginalized communities, you start to find that their access to healthcare is more, shall I say, causic of their condition than their behaviors and any sort of resources that they have collected over their life in public education system and what have you. Now, this is the thing, because this story kind of parallels something that Republicans have always talked about from time to time, and that is health care. Because when we look at this study, this under $250,000 study to find out why people that are suffering from two types of societal oppressions might deal with that in a way that's unhealthy by binge eating. When we talk about a party that sees that as sound the alarms, what, pray tell, is their solution for health care, Thomas?
They don't have one. Well, that's not true. They had Romney Care, which is the Affordable Care Act in essence, and then they poo-pooed it because it became the Affordable Care Act, which was originally started by the Heritage Foundation. So, they should have had one, but they don't. And instead of talking about ways to better healthcare, they just ignore it, or they try to dismantle what we do have, which is barely effective treatment of a major problem that we have.
Well, the major problem is, and I have to bring this up once again, the major problem with the United States is that our insurance and treatment schedules are more towards rehabilitative and treatment and not preventative, preemptive kind of, health scare avoidance. Now, famously, I've brought up obesity on this show time and time and time again about how medical health care providers and medical insurance providers will not give you things for gap conditions, insulin resistance, or the doctor tells you, hey, you're at a kind of a weight where your metabolism can start to go towards type 2 diabetes. You might want to lose some weight. You go to your insurance company and say, hey, I need money to get these medicines to help me lose weight. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, I say this after the advisement of doctors everywhere. Some of us can't lose weight by diet and exercise alone. That is just, everybody is metabolically different, and the more that you go around and body shame people without understanding the intricacies of medical science, the more disservice you do to us all. So, with that said, whenever you have a condition where, like binge eating can lead to type 2 diabetes. Now, type 2 diabetes can take you down a path of pulmonary conditions. It can take you down hypertension conditions. It can take you down endocrimatic conditions, things where certain chemical mixtures in your body go off. I don't know, might even throw you into a deep depression from time to time. The problem is that with something like type 2 diabetes, which is epidemic here in the United States, we always seek to kind of belittle or jump on people that might be suffering this condition, and that's led a lot of people's attitudes to, I'm not getting overweight. I'm perfectly healthy. I mean, my uncle lived for 40 years off of a can of beer and 3 cigars a day. I have good genes in me, and we tell these health lies to ourselves. But no more has a health lie ever been more damaging than when it comes to how we treat obesity in this country. Now, this study, like I said, clickbaity headline. When I first read it, I was like, oh God, Thomas is pulling stuff off the Onion again just to mess with me. No. At the end of the day, we have to face facts that behavior in the United States has to be looked at. And since we're not comfortable with talking about mental health, how many shootings have we had so far this year? How many conversations of mental health have we had? My point made exactly. But since we're not comfortable with talking about mental health, Thomas, can we get America talking seriously about obesity?
I would hope so, but probably not. It seems to have the same stigma attached to it, and probably because so many of us are dealing with mental health issues. I am one of them, and who deals with several different mental health issues. But it's something I deal with and have gotten treatment for to deal with them, and I'm better off because of the treatment than when I started. But not every American is as lucky as I am, but every American should be.
Yeah, and the thing is like, I always tell people when it comes to my mental health, I got educated a long time ago that if you are not proactive, you will always be reactive, and that's never a good place to be with mental health. So one of the things that we have to talk about is behavioral science, and stories like this that are masking up we're all talking about overweight lesbians. That's not what they're talking about at all. When a story like this comes out with those headlines, shouldn't instead the mental thinking be, we're looking at one of the most marginalized communities in the United States that just so happens to, by and large, be suffering from, per capita, more obesity and instances of type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, we need to have a rational discussion about this. And this article headline and how they frame it is far from rational. It's incendiary. And the sad part is if Elizabeth Harrington, who wrote this article, took half as much time to look into the root causes and explain why this would be a good thing as opposed to a bad thing, we'd actually have a better conversation. But that doesn't serve the outrage alert purpose that they're trying to make with this article in the first place.
Yeah, and it is, once again, kind of, I don't want to say that this is endemic of the entire Trump administration and the whole vibe of the country under Donald Trump, but can we just go ahead and say that when a story comes out like this that is very anti-science, I find it hilarious that they have to also go to homophobia and racism to back up their anti-science.
Well, that's the thing, too. There are many moving parts in this article, and if you get beyond the clickbait headline of the article, you can actually see some really fascinating points that are quoted and justify the spending of the money, and they even try to trash more money being spent in institutions, and it justifies it in the long run, and they don't have a very solid argument except for the clickbait article headline.
Yeah, because, look, this is the thing. One of these other little, and once again, Daily Beast, thank you for covering news that really matters. Because this is the thing. When I tried to look into, let's look into not Republican legislators or officials. Instead, let's look into the conservative provocateurs of the country, those leaders, so-called leaders of conservative thought. And no guy is more leading in conservative thoughts than Phil Robertson. You know him, right?
Oh, yes. He's a commentator for Blaze TV now, which is always a funny thing.
Okay, well, the former star of Duck Dynasty and all-around hobo extraordinaire who could have, let's just go ahead and say, bested Terry Bradshaw in a game of football. This guy seems to think that he has the perfect solution for health care. And this is the thing. When it comes to his answer, he basically got on television and says, I don't need health care because I was given, quote, eternal health care by God. And it's not technical unless you put the two syllables in. I'm from the South. I can tell you this, Thomas. 2 syllables. God gives him eternal health care. But if I'm not mistaken, wasn't there a time that we used to sit around and ask deities for favors in our medical lives, and those people died, and we called it the Dark Ages?
Yeah, and to be fair, those times still exist because every once in a while I do that myself. But I'm a little bit rational about it too because I'll still see a doctor. and thank that same God for medical care. But I'd like to think a little wiser than Phil Robertson. That being said, though, this is the attack that we see on science and healthcare and the system that we have and the religiosity. Now, you could go and laugh at the Scientology billionaire contract that they have Sea Org members sign for their time in the Sea Org, but this is exactly to the point of what they say, only different. I don't need to worry about my health because I got me Jesus. I mean, how is that any different than I don't need to worry about the consequences of my actions because I signed me a billionaire contract? It's still the same amount of crazy and religiosity that we have, and still willing to attack science.
This is the problem with like I said, conservative thought provocateurs like Phil Robertson. These are the guys that they have the cool little programs, and because Donald Trump was on TV, he thinks that people on TV know everything. So these are the people that resonate. And if you're somebody that doesn't like newspapers or you like shows, the simple wisdom of a show like Duck Dynasty that tells you to be good, work hard, and be with your family, it really resonates with you. But when you look at the other values around Phil Robertson, this is white privilege at its best, because he didn't get that old by just praying, did he?
No, absolutely, and he even says it himself in the interview where he tells Cavuto that basically I worked for 50 years and I didn't need health care, and I still don't. But when I got rich, everybody started offering me health care, and so I got it. Not everybody is that fortunate, and he doesn't even see how privileged he is while still pointing out his privilege.
Yeah, because I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I once fell off of a mountain and broke a lot of bones, and praying did not help. Might have something to do with my current religious status in this world. What I'm saying, though, is there are people that kind of use this language. And Phil Robertson, I think, unfortunately is guilty of this, using this type of language to say, hey, we don't need to fix anything. It's already fixed enough. It's in God's hands. This show, well, is in break right now. When we come back, we have got a lot of stuff to cover. So make sure you stay close. It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show.
Opiates has taken everything and everyone I've ever loved away from me. Everything. All I did was dance. I was being scouted for a scholarship.
I blew my ankle out and I got prescribed pain pills by my doctor.
If making my detox public is gonna help somebody, I'm all for it.
Is there any medicine that I can have right now? I'm cold sweating really bad.
I just wish I would have had a warning.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth.
Dig deeper. Remove the hype. Find the facts. It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show on the Pacifica Radio Network.
It's the Shaggy Jenkins Show on the Pacifica Radio Network. Welcome back to it. It's me, your host, live here from the place called Maui, where we avoided that whole polar vortex thing you guys suffered through. But look, if you've got some time and you want to kind of catch up on things, feel free to drop by our website at shaggyjenkins.com or, see what I'm up to during the day. I have this whole other kind of life happening now. You can find that at Shaggy Live. Joining me from the wonderful, well, it's kind of wonderful, it's kind of nice, it's lovely Connecticut, I believe. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, Thomas Reynolds.
Yep, I'm in my hidey hole in Connecticut with the weird weather that should be more like Las Vegas weather than it actually is.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that I like to talk about because, Thomas, you know, when we talk about themes on the show, specifically themes of how governance works and stuff like that, you would say that Donald Trump right now is, well, he's running a different kind of modus operandi of governance. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
Well, this is the thing, because we always kind of reference back to the Russian-Trump thing being kind of like America's new Watergate. And then it eclipsed Watergate, and we were like, holy cow, we need to invent a word for this because Watergate is no longer a big enough comparison for how deep this gotten. And, you know, even some Trumpers were in on it and saying, well, we should call it like Clinton Gate too. And I'm thinking, no, the Whitewater thing was not as big as a foreign government interfering with a free and open American election. That pales in comparison. But when we talk about all these comparisons to past presidents, Thomas, we do spend a lot of time comparing the Trump presidency with Nixon, don't we?
Yeah, because they're a lot alike. The only difference between Nixon and Donald Trump is Richard Nixon had a clue in how to govern, which is saying a lot for a Republican.
Yeah, because let's not forget, Richard Nixon is the one that signed in the Environmental Protection Act. He also signed in the American Kidney Dialysis Act. It is the only form of socialized medicine that exists in the United States. If your kidneys are sick, the government will pay for it. Richard Nixon signed that. So, yeah, kind of counterintuitive to the Republicans we know today. We have the president taking away everybody's health care and trying to build walls with it. But Nixon had, when you talk about that political savvy that he enjoyed, that style that he had, Nixon had two different sides. Okay? On the head side, there was friendly Richard Nixon. Friendly Richard Nixon was very magnanimous. One time got so caught up in scandal and embroiled in this whole campaign financing thing that he decided, instead of just making a big hullabaloo about it, he would write a speech about the dog and just awe America into accepting his, okay, it was kind of shady and unlawful what happened there. But the soft side of Nixon was able to peddle that out to the American public, and they just, oh, we love you. But then there's the other side. On the tail side of this whole Richard Nixon side was Tricky Dick, a manipulative, a maniacal, almost paranoid megalomaniac type of personality. And in that personality, Nixon was, dare I say, Thomas, the most effective in his political career.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's where it's almost a shame to compare the two, because Nixon actually knew which hallway he was walking down when he was walking down it and which way he was going to present himself. And Donald Trump doesn't know those things. He thinks he does because he thinks he can do no wrong because he has a bunch of sycophants who tell him so, like Roger Stone. But in fact, he doesn't. And that's why people in the White House are so afraid of him. That's why when he gives a speech in the State of the Union, it's so darn scary and maniacal. And that's why when anybody talks about him, the first thing that comes to mind is liar.
Yeah, because when it comes to Richard Nixon, here's a quote from him. And this is kind of one of those quotes that we're going to discuss with Donald Trump's presidency. From Nixon, quote, "People react to fear, not love. They don't teach that in Sunday school, but it's true." Now, that quote came directly from Richard M. Nixon, and I'm thinking that this one was the Tricky Dick side of the coin. What say you?
I think you're right. The only thing I dispute in that is that I think they do teach it in Sunday school, going back to the days of Deuteronomy and thou shalt not eat a certain type of fish, otherwise will go to hell, and things of that nature. There's a lot of, if you don't do it the right way, you're going to get some fear in the Bible, and then you go to the New Testament where you get the love and the kindness and the hugs and the rainbows. So I think that you have to take the good with the bad, and just like the Bible, Richard Nixon is a little bit of a combination of both. And going back to my original statement, it's unfair to Richard Nixon, and I can't believe I'm saying this, to compare him to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is much, much worse.
The thing is that if that is a quote that has some sort of precedence in the White House, specifically in a time as tumultuous as Watergate was, Donald Trump better memorize that quote, because in the next coming months, if this statement is true, if what Richard Nixon said is in fact the truth, how much worrying does Donald Trump have to do now?
I think he has a lot, but he's playing the long game, right? He's keeping his base happy. He's doing everything that he can to pump the build the wall meme, even though he got Nancy Pelosi by that. And he's still trying to keep everybody in the base in line. And there are a lot, maybe not Ann Coulter, but there are Rush Limbaugh's, Sean Hannity's of the world who are sycophants to help keep that game going. And as long as he's able to do that, you have the fear and the justification reasoning for him to do things. It's all about how long he can sustain it to get reelected and possibly the presidency for a second term. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't be indicted. That doesn't mean that other people and dominoes might fall in the investigation surrounding him, but he might, especially if the Democratic Party can't get their act together for 2020, he might just as well, and I'll say it here on this show too, be president again, and that's a scary notion.
It is, because, look, when we talk about fear in the White House, see, Donald Trump does have a lot to fear in the months to come, because he kind of tried to use Nixon's method, or actually, he was actually closer to Lyndon B. Johnson, the Johnson treatment. He has tried to use, more so than any other president throughout modern history, fear, both in his political party, when he goes and says, look at all these invasions happening to our southern border. They're rapists. They're gangsters. They're coming to take your babies. Ha ha. Ooh hoo hee hee. To the funny farm. Okay. Sorry. Got distracted. Yeah, it's Hawaiian weather has messed with me lately. The thing is that Donald Trump has used the fear of immigrants to try to get with policy. He's used the fear of the Antifa to kind of support white nationalists, going as far to call himself a nationalist, and nobody gut checked this guy. I digress. But the thing is that time and time again, Donald Trump has used fear as a tool. Thomas, do you know what happens to a population that has been inundated with fear for a long period of time that all of a sudden sees the right picture?
Well, eventually they revolt. And hopefully it'll be by the ballot box and no other way, right? We don't want violence, and surely we're not calling for violence. But one of the things that we have to do is be mindful of people who are going to be dealing with the upcoming election and make a smart choice to do that revolt and see it happen. We need to be very responsible in who we pick, and we can't just pick somebody who's going to be easily attacked by this guy. If they cannot, whether it's a him or a her, if they cannot stand up on a regular basis to Donald Trump and his antics, we will lose. You could take that to the bank, and I'll take all the shame for it at doubtingtom@fynation.com you want to give me, because I'm happy to say it, because the facts bear that out, and the truth bears that out, because the fear is a big factor in this, and that's how he won the first time, by scaring the bejesus out of everybody.
Yeah, and now he's been using that same type of behavior for the entire time that he's occupied the White House. The problem is that when it comes to Donald Trump, he too tried to come up with a quote, and it was, quote, "Real power is, I don't even want to use the word fear." So if you have two different, oh, and by the way, possibly the worst two examples of presidents using fear as a tactic of governance. What happened in the aftermath of Watergate, and can that happen again?
It could, but I see it really unlikely because you have the protections of the Senate. The Senate has to fall to the Democratic Party in line with the Democratic House. As long as the Republican Senate stays strong, gets the judges they want, and passes the not legislation so much as the judges and the way they want things done, you're going to see a President Donald Trump being just fine, regardless of the scandals. That's the scary thing in all this, and why the blue wave, while good, wasn't as great as it could have been.
Well, this is the thing, because I want to go through a checklist of fear tactics and kind of the end results that Donald Trump has gotten from them, because some are a little weird because you're going, did that work? It looked like it worked, but now evidence says it didn't work. Let's not forget, Donald Trump famously used fear in international diplomacy. And the one thing that he's going to be harping on, probably for the rest of his life, is the fact that he is the man that shook up Kim Jong-un from North Korea. He made him quake in his boots, so much so that they capitulated to the wishes of the American people. They have started the peace treaty and peace agreements with the South Koreans, and they'll never do anything like rocket testing again. They've been building new bases lately, Thomas. Did fear work like Donald Trump claims it did?
No. In fact, it did the opposite. I'm a North Korean file, and I'm one of these people who really watches this in a lot of ways. And Kim Jong-un played this masterfully to the point that Donald Trump is in love with him, because he saw right from the start that Kim Jong-un had something that Donald Trump never had, was that a firm base that will not disrespect him. Donald Trump gets disrespect every day. Kim Jong-un can go around, do what he wants, and not have any disrespect. In fact, if they do, they'll get eaten by a dog. So, this is where we're at. And the fear didn't work. If anything, he got played, and that will go down in history. And it wouldn't be like Richard Nixon going to China to keep the Nixon comparison alive, because Nixon actually got certain things out of that in the long run, and history has shown that, where history will show that Kim Jong-un played Donald Trump.
And that's just it. He used the fear of what American retaliation would look like against North Korea and said, well, of course, I bullied them into winning. And then we found out not so winning after all. Also, let's go to the domestic front, because Donald Trump said time and time and time again, leading up to the midterm election, that if we don't elect more Republicans, that migrant caravan is just going to break down our southern border, and then the next thing you know, we're going to have Islamic terrorists here, we're going to have MI-13, we're going to have MST-3K, we're going to have some UGO. I mean, we're going to have just all kinds of acronyms coming up from the bottom coast, and it was just going to be bad for Americans, white people. And all of a sudden, with all of this fear-mongering that he did it work in driving people to the polls in his favor?
No, it didn't, and we saw that in the blue wave. Now, I can't tell you what happened with the Senate, because that's still a mystery to me, where we had a lot more Republicans winning. But I think in large part with the Senate, it was they didn't have good quality candidates running on the Democratic side. But what we saw in the House, and why I say no, is good quality Democratic candidates who ran on a regular message of change and health care and things that the American people really wanted to talk about, as opposed to the Guardians of the Galaxy side of the Republican Party, where it was fear 24/7, and that didn't work. Again, it goes back to failure, and to compare him to Richard Nixon is actually doing a disservice to Richard Nixon, which makes my skin crawl, the fact that I have to say that.
Well, I know, but the thing is that because they've always used fear, I kind of want to talk about some of the things under Trump, okay? Because we know Trump uses his Twitter account to elicit fear in his base, to kind of shake up the people in the GOP and the Democrats that don't agree with him. In other words, political badgering, a.k.a. political fears, being used again exploitatively. But this is the thing. While he's doing all these fear-based maneuvers, another one of his agencies has been guilty of using fear to kind of drive their agenda. And this one's going to be funny for you. Thomas, quickly, because I did not give you time to study this question, how has the FCC used fear recently to get their way?
Good question, because I don't know, but I'm sure you'll tell me to help me out.
Oh, okay, I see. That one's like a quick toss. No, this is the thing. The FCC said, look, if we want to live up to our broadband obligations here in the United States, which is basically like the Obama administration did, saying that broadband internet access is actually a public utility, moving it from Title I to Title II. They wanted to go back to Title I, which they did in a kind of a lopsided panel on the FCC. What does that mean? That means that every ISP, internet service provider out there, can now discriminate traffic and can kind of do all of the bad things that for years I petitioned people to kind of get an understanding of what was going on, because net neutrality was going to happen. And of course, the original Net Neutrality Act passed. Yay, and we were all happy for a while. Ajit Pai came in and automatically said one thing: be afraid of the way that the FCC has been set up before. Now, why would a guy with a comically oversized suit jacket and Reese's mug, why would a guy that wears ill-fitting clothes like him, who looks like he is happy-go-lucky, automatically come to the American public with fear tactics when he wanted to change around the FCC?
Because going against net neutrality has no other actual realistic option, and it's a bad argument in the first place. Because the truth of the matter is, if you're a company and if you're a big boy, you get all the speed, you get all the access, and you get all the everything when it comes to the internet. If you're small without net neutrality, you're not able to start up, and you can't sell that to the American people. So what you then end up selling is the fear and the fear mongering, which seems to work best in this country because we've been built on war and genocide and waging of mass distraction to get what we want in the long run and to fight our battles, and never seem to have any rationale for just about anything in the long run, because if we did, we'd have things for like Medicare for all already.
This is the thing, because I want to read you part of this little love note that House Democrats sent over to the FCC. Quote, "Not only have you failed on numerous occasions to provide Democratic members of this committee with responses to their inquiries, you have also repeatedly denied or delayed responding to legitimate information requests from the public about agency operations. These actions have denied the public of a full and fair understanding of how the FCC, under your leadership, has arrived at public policy decisions that impact Americans every day in communities across the country." Now, this is the part that you're going to like. The FCC should be working to advance the goals of public safety, consumer protection, affordable access, and connectivity across the United States. Under your leadership, the FCC has failed repeatedly to act in the public interest and place the interest of corporations above consumers. Now, they're talking once again about net neutrality, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why they used fear, because they weren't going to lift a finger for the American people, because the only people that the Republican Party lift a finger for is corporations and the big donor, which go hand in hand with the white men mantra that we talked about in the first part of the hour. It goes back to selling a fear, attacking science, attacking reality, and not giving a hoot about anything in particular when it comes to the little guy, and then saying, well, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, if you want to have a small website and get a lot of traction, you're not going to do that right now, because if one big ISP doesn't like what you're saying, they can stop your traffic.
The thing is about this particular letter that was sent over to the FCC is that it kind of alleges that the FCC has deliberately been negligent in reporting its policies and procedures back to the public it serves. And one of those cases we talked about, and this was well before you came on the show. I was still a young man doing the show all alone, an idealist, as it were, Thomas, thinking that I could do all of this by myself. Who was I kidding? But this is the thing. The FCC said, okay, you know what? We're going to jump in and we're going to say, hey, public, you have a chance to respond to our big repeal of net neutrality. And Ajit Pai got in front of everybody and said this is good for corporations, and infrastructure spending under net neutrality has stopped, and the consumer has suffered, which were both lies. Verizon actually increased spending of infrastructural improvement under net neutrality by almost 20-something%. So lies. Ajit Pai should know that. He was a lobbyist for Verizon, by the way. So he goes out and says, we've stifled American communications business, and there's no way that this can work. And oh my God, we have to do something about it. But don't worry, I'll let you have a go at telling us what you think. For days and days and days, those websites were crashed. And in the aftermath of that, Thomas, we found out that the FCC deliberately let the website portal crash for customers to ask them about the net neutrality repeal. Does this shock you one bit?
No, because they don't care. The Republicans don't care about the little guy. They prove it time and time again. And as you said, he was a lobbyist for Verizon, and they work hand in hand with people who are willing to get rich quicker and stay rich if they're already rich. They're not willing to work for the guy tolling on the internet trying to get this new startup going, and they don't care. They only care about what the bottom dollar and bottom line is of business, and that's why they can't govern, because you have to take everybody along for the ride. You can't leave anyone behind, and they keep forgetting that because it's unnecessary to their platform.
It really is. And I mean, let's just be honest. Consumers are just damned annoying to the FCC. Oh, because let's just famously, every time they've tried to bring up any sort of net neutrality hearing, the FCC website shuts down because of the amount of traffic it receives. So when Ajit Pai gets in front of people and he says things like, oh yeah, we've got sufficient input from the American public to know that our decision is done in good faith, where did he get sufficient from a broken system?
Well, that's exactly it. He didn't, and he doesn't care. And it goes back to, we're going to lead with fear, and we're going to lead with what you're not going to get as opposed to what you will get, because there isn't anything not having net neutrality that you will get. Who gets the big things and the best out of net neutrality is the corporations and the lobbyists. And we've seen that time and time again. And if it wasn't true, why does he have a job in Washington in the first place? Explain that one to me and you'll get a cookie.
You know,
austerity.
Yeah, an austerity cookie. Now, here's the thing, is because coming up on Thursday of this week, so tomorrow, coming up is going to be a little subcommittee hearing about the impact of the net neutrality repeal. So this Democratic letter that's went out ahead of that hearing is basically saying, look, you have said that the public can interface with the FCC electronically through your web portals, and as such, we are now going to subpoena all of those electronic records. Please bring them with your testimony. And this is the thing. They also want to know if the validity could be of those numbers. The validity could be assured and verified. And if indeed, like we brought up on this show, that the FCC just deliberately let their page break, well, what the hell is up with that? Now, there was, of course, the rumor out there that at the time, and Ajit Pai and Republicans actually put this out on their side before quickly shutting it down, realizing that, oops, we might be telling people that Russians are helping us, said that when it came to the FCC net neutrality repeal vote, it was Russian hackers that took down the FCC page. Do you remember how quickly that story disappeared?
Yeah, I do, and that's the sad truth of it. It shows the lack of leadership in the Democratic side to push harder to keep that story alive, because that goes into forms of collusion with this government, and it goes to furthering the story that this isn't a witch hunt with the Mueller probe, because the Russians benefit equally for aiding and abetting this government and dealing with it. It's just another example of how the Russians benefit in the long run.
Oh, God, I know. And Thomas, we got like a minute here left in the show. So final thoughts on this. Do you think Ajit Pai should be afraid of what's about to come?
I would hope so, but probably not, because it seems that the Democratic Party does not have a clear way to send this message across for enough people to hear about it, because this should be on every TV screen, and it's not.
Yeah, well, that's it for our show. We got to go. Until next week, stay sane. Love you, mean it. Get in, bye. We are out.